All right. So next is Mike Nolan. Thank you, Mike. He comes from the Rochester Institute of Technology, the open at RIT, right?
Yeah.
So he's going to talk about the foundational design contribution, around designing communities. So kind of a meta talk. He's great at giving meta talks. So please welcome Mike.
Thank you. Wow. All right. First of all, I would let's all give another round of applause to Perry. That was an amazing talk. I'm almost like, you should just take my spot and keep going, because there's so much to learn from Open Source Community Africa. They've brought so much energy and new talent and ideas to the global community, and so it's great to have perspectives like that here. So yeah, I'm Mike. It's nice to meet you all. It's nice to be here. I want to talk about designing communities and the sort of idea that I think community design, community maintenance, community growth is actually one of the best foundational contributions designers can make to open source. And I'm going to explain why. I'm going to give you a little bit of background on some of the stuff we do and why I think that. But yeah, that's my talk. And I'm Mike. First of all, I got to give some credit to those who have contributed. I work with a lot of very talented staff, designers, students who are just breaking into open source. These are two students that I think were particularly beneficial to the work that we do. Both Django and Daechan worked with us, went to RIT, went through our program. I believe both might be looking for work at this point. So if you're interested in hiring very open source savvy designers, I definitely recommend you reach out to me, reach out to the students. I can introduce you. And yeah, they're awesome. So first, I'm going to give you a little spiel about our organization and what we do to give some context. So I work for a university, the Rochester Institute of Technology. We have an office called Open at RIT, and we're like an open source office for the university. And so our goal is to discover, grow, and generally widen the footprint of RIT's impact on all things open work. So we say open work because we work with open source software, open data, open access journals, open everything. And that's who we are. And the reason we work across all these disciplines is a big factor in why we care so much about design in open source. And so what we do as an office is three main things. We educate. We're an educational institution. We provide curriculum. We teach courses in open source to students. We teach faculty about it. We have various training programs. We provide digital infrastructure for community building and general open source activities. And what I'm going to talk about today, probably most importantly, is provide a lot of individual assistance and consultation around open source communities. And we do a lot of work working directly with specific communities to help them grow, maintain themselves, become a community, all these things. And so we call this our fellowship. So what is it? Well, our fellowship, we target project maintainers, whether they're maintaining a data repository or a piece of software, and they need support growing or maintaining their community. And I never started my timer. And we assist in supporting them, because by providing them a team of designers and other supporting roles to build and execute a community roadmap, right? So we figure out what are all the things that you need to do to build or maintain your community. What's the evidence behind that, and then we help them do it. So yeah, that's what we do. But today I want to talk about design contributions, because I assume a lot of people here are pretty much interested in open source. They're interested in design. They're interested in contributing. And I want to talk a little bit about, from our experience, what we found people to think about design contributions. And so when we talk, particularly with software maintainers, we say, hey, you're looking for designers? And they're like, yeah, I want a designer. And I say, what do you want designers to contribute to your project? And they say stuff like this. And so if you're a designer that's ever talked to an open source maintainer, getting answers like this, it might feel maybe a little frustrating, or like your wide skill set is being underutilized. Not that like aesthetics and making things more aesthetically pleasing or providing little branding pieces aren't useful, but they're kind of small and constrained and maybe missing the point of what design can bring to many different projects. And so we think a little bit differently about what we feel our team's design contributions really are. And we're a little more covert about it. So the first thing that we do is we start with a problem that we know all of our project maintainers are facing, and that's maintaining, right? If you ever like maintaining a community, growing a community, pretty much most of our clients that we work with, this is the biggest problem that they face, and they don't even have an idea of how to fix it. And this is such a great place to bring in additional expertise, not only to try to solve the problem for them, but to help them think about like what it means to solve this problem of maintenance. And every piece of open work and every associated community has its own specific struggles and goals. And so our services are oftentimes tailored and dependent on their specific needs and circumstances. But in general, our fellows face some combination of these three goals or problems, depending on how you look at it. And so our services kind of act as like an accelerator program or a consultancy or something in that vein to help them overcome these things. And so as I said, we work with all kinds of different projects. So we don't really have like a cookie cutter solution. It's not just like, hey, here's a README template, put it on your repository, and you'll get all the contributors. So we try to be very general in thinking about our methodology. And I want to tell you a little bit about like kind of what that is and how we go about thinking about building communities and the role design plays in it. So I guess first of all, I want to talk a little bit about our influences in terms of how our process of community building, where it comes from. We take a lot of influence from programs like the Mozilla Open Leadership Training Series. There's a lot of different iterations of this series out there, whether it's like the Turing Way or Open Life Sciences, and there's lots of others. But this is where we get our foundation of thinking about contributor experience. We also pull from popular literature, like Nadia Eghbal's book, Working in Public, and then we kind of use design thinking as our sort of, I know it's kind of a catch-all term, but we use it as our sort of foundational methodology when trying to discover problems and create and iterate on solutions. So when I think about our methodology of designing a community roadmap, and executing it, it's really these three main steps. We work with a lot of really weird and different communities. One day we're working with like a social advocacy organization mapping issues of place-based racism around our local city. And then the next day we're working with physicists measuring gravity waves from black holes. So the first stage is always discovering the context of the project. What are the materials? What are the pieces of work being created? Why do they think opening it up and creating a peer-to-peer sort of community of contributors is useful? And what are they actually trying to do practically? This is really important for understanding like the backgrounds of people. The second part, if you ever like went through like a user experience design process, you might find familiar. We do like a mapping of stakeholders, not just users, but potential types of contributors, potential people who might be adjacent to the community, and we create personas for all of them. We call them contributor personas. And then for a lot of those, we create pathways, idealized pathways about how they could first discover the project, all the way to creating this funnel of where they make their first contribution, repeated contributions, all the way to becoming a leader in the field. To get an idea of like what is the ideal situation for this community, where people have all the resources they need to get involved if they want to, and all the people that can contribute the most are. And then using that plan, we work backwards, right? We identify problems. What pieces are missing? Are you missing pieces of digital infrastructure? Are you missing people to help out onboarding people? Are you missing documentation, branding? And we document those shortcomings, and then we iteratively design solutions to those shortcomings. So maybe we write a piece of documentation, and we test it out, right? We see how effective it is, and we keep doing that iteratively and watch as the community grows based on those. And we use that those findings and that testing to continually improve ourselves, not just with this community, but with others that we're working with. So, I probably should have went through these slides, but we discover the context of the project. We ask these questions. We're asking these questions when trying to figure out who the stakeholders are and what those gaps are. And then we provide various types of solutions, whether it's documentation, marketing materials, governance and decision-making documents, and best practices. And this is sort of the full start-to-finish consulting process that Open at RIT does. So I want to talk really quickly just about why we do this and why we think this is important from a design perspective, because I think a lot of designers, in particular, a lot of design is heavily influenced by product design, so they're thinking about an already existing kind of application with users, and you're creating a user design funnel. But from our perspective, that starting from the application is very difficult because maintainers oftentimes have these preconceived notions about where design sits, how they should integrate, and it's very difficult to even if they're willing to kind of get them started on the process of really rethinking what their application might be. And so we start with the community because it's a known problem, right? It's a known problem that maintainers are always feeling. I'm sure if you've ever hung around a lot of open source maintainers, burnout is a huge problem in the industry, and people are actively trying to find solutions to it, and they don't really have a good idea about how to do that. And so we found success in this work as introducing the design process to maintainers because it's important to them for these three primary reasons, right? First, as your community grows, the development and maintenance of it becomes increasingly complex, to the point of where a lot of times one person can't be the benevolent dictator for life, right? And so it becomes less tenable to have one person have the entire idea and the entire execution of the project in their head. And oftentimes they need the assistance of others to figure out how to split up that work and approach it in a more organizational and maybe even a bureaucratic sense. Second is managing a community and thinking about how to build a community roadmap. It's a multidisciplinary process. And from our perspective, we think design plays a huge role, and design is a great skill set to approach this problem from. And so maintainers of open work, in particular software developers, likely don't have access to those skills. And they probably don't have access to the time to learn those skills or acquire them. And so by bringing in designers into this process, you're immediately bringing huge value, not just to creating a small little piece of material to include in the project, but also to really foundationally rethink about how you're going about creating it. And then lastly, many open source projects are pretty severely under-resourced, right? And they're looking maybe to get resources, but even if they had access to funding, we found that many open source projects, they don't even know what to do with it. Or if they're looking for funding, they're oftentimes stuck at this place where they're like, oh, I need to have a really cohesive vision about how we're going to use funding to maintain ourselves, and I don't really have that. And so if you want that sort of resourcing, then you need a strategy. And we think that design is a really great place of systematically thinking about this problem of community maintenance and creating a strategy out of it, which makes it easier to get the money, which is always a useful thing. So I think it was Jan earlier who said something that really stuck out to me. He said, oh God, I'm going to butcher it. He said, a lot of people think of design as product and experience, right? And he said open source design is community and, is Jan here? Community and ecosystems, thank you. I was saying it over and over in my head before I got on stage, and then of course I forgot it. And I really like that because it certainly matches a lot of how we think about open source design. But especially for us, design is a process, right? It's not just the creation of a widget or a button. That's a big part of it, and it's a useful part of design. But really, when we think about design, it's a process. It's a process of identifying problems and systematically creating solutions and testing them to overcome them, right? And getting people to think about design as a process. And let me tell you, working with academics, getting them to think about anything in a certain way is difficult. But getting people to think about design as a process is difficult. But by walking them through it, by being there as they go through the design process themselves, from our perspective, we've seen it really change how people think about not only using designers in community maintenance, but also using designers in other types of their projects. And so, just for fun, as I was thinking about this and talking with some of our old fellows and people that we've worked with, I was like, what do you think of a design contribution? And some of the responses, they really surprised me in a good way. They think about design much more holistically. I need to unify the brand across all these projects that I have, right? I want to improve the user experience of this one function of my app. People keep on complaining to me, but I don't know how to overcome it. And the way that works for me apparently isn't working for everyone else, right? Or I put all this time developing this really cool feature, and people aren't really using it, right? This is such a fundamentally different way for a maintainer to engage with designers. And for us, starting at community development is the perfect way to introduce them in a friendly and very, very useful and necessary way about how to engage with designers. So that's my talk. Thank you for having me. And does anyone have any questions?
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. I'm Pau from Barcelona. Well, I would like to know, because you were talking about the community and also the maintainers, no? And I always come to my mind the question, all the open source projects that I've seen so far, the decision making, no? It's always the same format. I know that maybe it sounds a little bit strange, but it's an expression that it came to the open source, that it's a benevolent dictator, no? That it's you have 2-3 persons who at least is making the final decision, what is merging, what is inside. So I don't know if in your experience there is any sort of different ways to rule an open source, or it must be like that always. Thank you.
Yeah, great question. There's this author. You just asked like a question that's very near and dear to my heart. There's a guy named Nathaniel Schneider. He's a media studies professor in Colorado, and he researches this topic. And so what he claims is he says open source isn't democratic, right? Not inherently. It can be, but in the beginning, oftentimes it's implicitly feudal. So whenever you create a project, right, it always starts with one. Starts with the first commit, right? You can bring in your friends and whatever. You can give other people admin access to the repository. But it always starts with one, like the one Lord, right? And I think if you look at, maybe if you wanted a real-life example of something that's maybe governed in a significantly different way than that, you could look at something like the Debian project, maybe. Which is quite significantly different. It's a very large project. There's different people responsible for different parts. There's another tool called Community Rule. I think the website is communityrule.info, where you can create standardized documentation templates for different types of governing a project. So maybe you have people responsible for different types of the code base. Maybe there's some form of voting for active contributors or review periods. It doesn't have to be the benevolent dictator for life. And there is a lot of actually great resources out there assisting people in kind of discovering those. But I will say, you know, as part of the process that we do, oh, the text is so small. A big part of the work that we do is actually helping people evaluate and determining what sort of governance procedures are best for them. And a lot of times you need to talk to the community. A lot of the work that we do is interview-based research with community members to determine how they're interacting with each other and what might be the most effective way of making decisions. It's probably a bit of a long in the tooth response, but I hope it kind of answers what you're looking for.
Hey, I love the different scenarios you showed about what some developers expect from a designer, and later down the line, what can be expected from said designers. I do wonder, I try to draw a parallel with software development where ideally any software developer could contribute with software architecture and solve big performance problems, scalability. But this is I don't think it's the easiest way to get someone onboarded. And having good first issues, bug fixing, those are easier ways to assess whether it's worth investing on that contributor as well. So I do wonder if you see some overlapping between the two design request groups you draw, and whether you do see the simple one as a way also to onboard designers that eventually can be of more help in the bigger questions.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a very good point you make. And I think, oh, I'm sorry, I forget, it wasn't Marie, but one of the women from Red Hat that presented earlier said that, you know, when we onboard designers as contributions, it takes a lot more work to bring them on. And so you lose that sort of low-hanging fruit of an easy first commit. That something like maybe doing a logo design or kind of fixing maybe a stylistic change in a button could provide. And so I think one of the reasons why we like community maintenance and development as a place of like having these big onboarding, you know, when our students, we pay them and they work full time on these sorts of projects, right? So it's not something that's like very easy to do for maybe a volunteer that only has a couple hours a week to participate. But we find that there's a lot of opportunities where a lot of people are so desperate and there's a lot of funding available specifically for figuring out how to better sustain communities and open source software, that at least right now at this time for us, it's a good opportunity to at least bring in as many designers into the community as we can. That might change down the line, and I do think that you're correct and that there's a connection between finding ways to make small contributions for designers as a way of funneling them in to kind of longer term, more sustained participation. I'm going to go back to my question slide. Thank you.